I'm Brandon, Arshitsi, working 60-hour weeks at a tech startup that's barely staying afloat. Every day is a blur of meetings and deadlines while I struggle to make rent in a city that devours my paycheck. Last Tuesday, I collapsed during a presentation to investors. The doctor said it was exhaustion and dehydration. Then my dad called the hospital room and casually asked, "Is the $3? 500 I send each month enough?" I froze. Confused. What allowance? The line went silent for so long I thought we'd disconnected. If you're watching this from your comfortable couch, drop a like and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable enough. My parents both worked decent jobs. Dad is an electrical engineer and Mom is an administrative assistant at a local high school. Our two-story house had a basketball hoop in the driveway where my younger brother Jason and I would play until the streetlights came on. Those were simple times when family meant security. And I never thought about things like rent or utility bills. Everything changed when I was 16 and Jason was 14. The arguments had been increasing for months. But I still wasn't prepared when Dad sat us down and explained that he and Mom were getting divorced. 2 weeks later, he moved out, and 3 months after that, he relocated to Arizona for a new job. The court granted Mom primary custody, which meant Jason and I stayed in the family home, though it never felt the same. Despite the distance, Dad made an effort to stay connected. We had weekly phone calls where he'd ask about school sports and my plans for the future. He never missed a birthday or Christmas, always sending thoughtful gifts that showed he still remembered who I was becoming. When I made it onto the honor roll, he flew back just to take me out to dinner and tell me how proud he was. My relationship with Mom was different. After the divorce, she seemed to pour all her attention into Jason. While I got lectures about responsibility and independence, Jason received endless support and understanding. When I needed new basketball shoes, Mom said I should save my allowance. But when Jason wanted the latest gaming console, she somehow found the money. I told myself it was because he was younger and needed her more. But the pattern continued as we got older. I graduated high school with a decent GPA and got accepted to Michigan State University. Dad offered to help with tuition, but Mom insisted that college students should learn financial independence, so I took out loans, worked 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore, and picked up extra shifts delivering pizzas on weekends. Meanwhile, Jason got a new car for his 16th birthday. Those college years were tough but formative. I majored in computer science, drawn to the creative problem-solving and future job prospects. Between classes, work, and studying, I barely had time for a social life. My roommates would invite me to parties, but I usually declined. Knowing I had early shifts the next morning, by graduation, I had a degree, 45美元, 0 inches student loans, and a determination to make something of myself. The job market was competitive, but I landed a position at a promising tech startup in Seattle. The salary wasn't impressive, but the opportunity seemed worth it. My new manager talked about growth potential and equity options that could be valuable if the company succeeded. Dad congratulated me on the phone, telling me he was proud I was forging my own path. Mom's response was more subdued. She was busy helping Jason apply for community college. Seattle's cost of living hit me like a physical blow. My entry-level salary that had sounded reasonable during the interview barely covered a studio apartment in a building with questionable plumbing and neighbors who fought at all hours. After rent, utilities, student loan payments, and groceries, I had almost nothing left. Public transportation costs ate what little remained. I embraced frugality with an almost religious devotion. Breakfast was instant oatmeal. Lunch was peanut butter sandwiches I packed myself. And dinner was usually rice with whatever protein was on sale that week. Haircuts became a luxury I could only afford every 3 months. When my coworkers invited me for happy hour, I'd claim I was busy rather than admit I couldn't afford a single beer. Work became my entire life. I arrived early and stayed late, hoping the extra effort would lead to a promotion or at least a decent raise. My boss noticed my dedication and gave me increasing responsibility. Though the promised financial recognition always seemed just around the next corner, after we secure the next round of funding, he'd say, or once we launched the new product line, my health began to suffer under the constant pressure. The headache started first, dull, persistent pain behind my eyes that over-the-counter medication barely touched. Then came the insomnia, lying awake, worrying about bills while exhaustion pulled at my bones. I started getting frequent colds that lingered for weeks because I couldn't afford to rest. When a molar began throbbing with pain, I ignored it until the agony drove me to an emergency dental clinic where I put the root canal on a credit card already approaching its limit. Phone calls with Dad became shorter as I didn't want to worry him with my struggles. I painted a rosier picture of my career progress, talking about interesting projects rather than financial hardships. Conversations with Mom were even more infrequent and usually centered around Jason's latest achievements. His promotion at the electronics store, the new apartment he was moving into, the vacation he was planning. The day everything changed started like any other. I woke up after 4 hours of restless sleep, gulped down coffee, and rushed to catch my bus. We had investors visiting the office, and I was scheduled to present our latest development project. My head was pounding, my vision occasionally blurring at the edges. But I pushed through the morning meetings, fueled by determination and more caffeine. Standing before the conference room of potential investors and executives, I felt unusually hot. My notes seemed to swim on the page in front of me. But I soldiered on, explaining technical specifications and market potential. Midway through explaining a complex algorithm, the room began to spin. I reached for the edge of the table to steady myself, but my hand found only air. The last thing I remember is the startled expressions of the investors as the floor rushed up to meet me. I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the antiseptic smell of hospital linens. A nurse with kind eyes was adjusting something on an IV drip connected to my arm. My mouth felt like sandpaper, and my head throbbed with each heartbeat. "Welcome back," she said, noticing my open eyes. "You gave everyone quite a scare." Fragments of memory returned. The presentation, the dizziness, the fall. Embarrassment washed over me, followed immediately by anxiety. Not about my health, but about what this would mean for my job, and more pressingly, how I would pay for this hospital stay. "How long have I been here?" I croaked. "About 6 hours." She replied, "The doctor will be in shortly to discuss your condition. But you're suffering from severe dehydration and exhaustion. Your body essentially forced you to take the break you've been denying it." The doctor arrived moments later, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a tablet he consulted before addressing me. "Mr. Walsh," he began, "your blood work shows significant electrolyte imbalances, and you're showing signs of adrenal fatigue. Have you been under unusual stress lately?" I almost laughed. Unusual stress. Try constant, unrelenting pressure that had become so normal, I barely recognized it as abnormal anymore. "Work has been demanding," I understated. "And your eating habits?" "Sleep patterns." I reluctantly described my typical day: the long hours, minimal food, and insufficient rest. The doctor's frown deepened with each detail. "Brandon, your body can't sustain this pattern. You're 27. Not invincible. I'm recommending at least 3 days of rest, proper nutrition, and follow-up appointments." As he continued outlining a recovery plan that seemed utterly incompatible with my reality, my phone buzzed on the bedside table. It was my dad. "I need to take this," I said, reaching for the phone. The doctor nodded. "I'll check on you again before discharge." Think about what I've said. I answered the call, expecting the usual quick check-in. But Dad's voice carried unusual urgency. Brandon, your work called me as your emergency contact. What happened? Are you okay? I'm fine. Dad, I assured him, downplaying the situation. Just overdid it at work. Mild dehydration. Nothing serious. He didn't sound convinced. This isn't like you. Brandon, you've always taken care of yourself. Is everything really okay? There was genuine concern in his voice. And for a moment, I considered telling him everything. The financial struggles, the exhaustion, the growing sense that I was drowning. But old habits die hard. Really. Dad, I'm okay. Just need to drink more water and maybe take a day off. A pause followed. Then came the question that would change everything. Is the $3,500 I send each month not enough? If you need more, you just have to ask. The words didn't make sense. I thought perhaps the medication they'd given me was affecting my hearing. What allowance? I asked. Confusion evident in my voice. The silence that followed was so profound. I checked my screen to see if the call had dropped, but no. We were still connected. When Dad finally spoke again, his voice had changed completely tight with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. Brandon, he said slowly, I've been sending your mother $3,500 every month for the past 3 years. Ever since you graduated, it was for you. To help with your apartment. Your student loans. I'll give you a cushion while you started your career. My mind raced to process this information. 3 years. San million. 500 monthly. That was, I couldn't even do the math in my current state. But it was a substantial amount. Money that could have prevented everything I'd been through. Dad, I never received any money from you or Mom since I started working. Another long pause. After the divorce, your mother and I agreed that I would provide financial support for you kids through college and into early adulthood. For Jason, I've been contributing to his college fund. For you, once you graduated, we agreed on the monthly allowance. I've been sending it directly to your mother's account for the past 3 years. The implication hung in the air between us. My throat tightened as pieces began falling into place. Mom's new car last year, the kitchen renovation, Jason's seemingly endless supply of new electronics and clothes. I need to go, I said abruptly as a nurse entered with discharge paperwork. I'll call you back. The next hour passed in a blur. Signing forms. Receiving prescriptions. Listening to care instructions that barely registered. All I could think about was the money. My money. Over $100. 000. That could have changed everything about my struggle these past years. As I hailed a ride share outside the hospital entrance, the driver asked if I was all right. I must have looked as shell-shocked as I felt. Just tired. I replied, giving him my address. But exhaustion had nothing to do with the hollowness spreading through my chest. It was something far worse. The first tremors of betrayal from the person who was supposed to protect me most. My apartment felt smaller and shabbier than ever as I let myself in. Still weak from my hospital stay. The single window faced a brick wall, barely letting in any natural light. The second-hand futon that doubled as my bed was unmade, and dishes from yesterday's hurried breakfast cluttered the tiny sink. This wasn't just a temporary living situation anymore. This represented 3 years of unnecessary struggle. I sank onto the futon, my discharge papers falling to the floor. 3 years of $3,500 monthly. Iba arstu yuan. Zero total. The number was almost incomprehensible. That amount could have paid off my student loans entirely. It could have meant a decent apartment and proper healthcare savings for the future. It could have changed everything. My first instinct was to check my bank accounts, illogically, hoping there might have been some massive misunderstanding. I opened my laptop and logged into my checking account. Scanning months of transactions, nothing unusual appeared. Just my modest paychecks going in and bills going out, with the balance perpetually hovering just above zero. I checked my savings account next, which contained exactly $872, my emergency fund that never seemed to grow because emergencies kept happening. No mysterious deposits. No evidence of the money Dad claimed he'd been sending for 3 years. I pulled up old emails, searching for any mention from Mom about financial support. Nothing. In fact, the last time I'd asked for help, when my car had broken down beyond repair 6 months after moving to Seattle, Mom had lectured me about financial responsibility and suggested I take the bus instead. I'd been doing exactly that ever since. The evidence was becoming clear, but I needed to hear it from Mom herself. I picked up my phone, noticed 3 missed calls from Dad, and dialed Mom's number instead. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice carrying its usual distracted tone. "Brandon, this is unexpected. Is everything okay?" "Not really," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm calling about the money Dad's been sending for me." A beat of silence followed. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly. "What are you talking about? Dad just told me he's been sending $3.500 every month for the past 3 years. Money that was meant for me. But I never received. Your father says a lot of things." "Brandon." Her voice took on a defensive edge I recognized from childhood arguments. "You know how he exaggerates. So, he hasn't been sending money for me. Well, he sends child support. Of course, that arrangement didn't end just because you grew up, but it's not some specific amount for you personally. It's to support the family. This didn't align with what Dad had said. But I'm not living at home. I haven't been for years. Brandon, I'm in the middle of something right now. Can we discuss this later, before I could protest?" She added, "I'll call you this weekend." "Okay, love you." And the line went dead. Her evasiveness only intensified my suspicion. Mom had always been skilled at redirecting uncomfortable conversations. But this felt different. There was guilt in her abrupt ending of our call. I needed concrete evidence. I texted Dad. "Can you send me proof of these payments you've been making?" His response came quickly. "Logging into my bank now. We'll email statements." While waiting, I recalled other financial discrepancies over the years. The time Mom claimed she couldn't help with my textbooks because money was tight. Yet Jason got a new laptop the same month. Or when she said she couldn't visit me in Seattle because flights were too expensive. Then posted Facebook photos from her weekend trip to Las Vegas with her friends. Dad's email arrived with attachment bank statements showing consistent monthly transfers of $3.500 to Mom's account, dating back exactly 3 years. Each one referenced Brandon's support in the transaction notes. The evidence was undeniable. I called Dad back, my voice shaking slightly. "I got your email. I see the transfers." "Brandon, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I never thought to verify you were receiving the money. When you never mentioned it, I assumed you were being responsible, maybe saving it or investing. It never occurred to me." He trailed off. "It's not your fault," I assured him, though part of me wished he'd checked sooner. "But I need to understand what happened." "Of course. What are you going to do, confront Mom?" I said, a plan already forming. In person. After ending the call, I booked the cheapest flight to Grand Rapids for Friday afternoon. Using most of my meager savings, I then called my manager at work, explained the family emergency, and requested 2 personal days. Given my recent collapse, he didn't argue. I called Mom back, but the call went straight to voicemail. Rather than leave a message, I texted her, "Flying home this weekend. Need to talk in person." Her response came hours later. "Looking forward to seeing you. Jason will be excited." 2. The casual tone of her message with no acknowledgement of our earlier conversation, fueled my determination. This wasn't going to be a pleasant family reunion, but I needed answers. The flight to Michigan gave me time to organize my thoughts and evidence. I had Dad's bank statements printed out, along with a list of questions I needed answered. What had happened to the money? Why had she kept it from me? How could she watch me struggle financially while apparently using my support money for herself and Jason? When my plane landed Friday evening, I rented a car rather than asking for a pickup. I wanted the freedom to leave when I needed to, anticipating this wouldn't be a peaceful visit. Driving through my old neighborhood felt surreal. Fall leaves, carpeted lawns, and Halloween decorations adorned porches. My childhood home came into view, the two-story colonial with green shutters and the basketball hoop still standing in the driveway. But something was different. A brand-new SUV sat in the driveway. Definitely not the sensible sedan Mom had driven for years. I parked on the street and approached the house slowly, steeling myself for what was to come. Before I could knock, the door swung open and Mom stood there smiling as if this were any normal visit. "Brandon, you're earlier than I expected." She moved to hug me, but my stiff posture made her pause. "Are you still not feeling well? Jason mentioned you were in the hospital." So they'd been talking about me. "I'm fine," I replied, stepping past her into the house. "Where is Jason? He'll be here soon." "He doesn't live here anymore. Has his own place across town, but he comes for dinner most Fridays." I nodded, taking in the house's interior. The living room had new furniture, and the kitchen, visible through the archway, had been remodeled with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Small changes individually, but collectively they painted a picture of financial comfort that contrasted sharply with my struggling existence. "Nice renovations?" I commented. "When did you do all this?" "Oh, gradually over the past couple of years," Mom replied, seemingly oblivious to my tone. "Would you like something to drink while we wait for Jason? Water is fine," I said, following her to the kitchen. We engaged in strained small talk about her job and neighborhood gossip while I sipped my water. I was just about to broach the real reason for my visit when the front door opened again. "Mom, you wouldn't believe what Henderson said at work today." Jason's voice cut off as he entered the kitchen and saw me. "Brandon, didn't know you were coming." His surprise seemed genuine, but there was something else in his expression. Weariness, perhaps. My response died in my throat as I took in my younger brother's appearance. Designer jeans, an expensive-looking watch, and keys to what appeared to be a high-end car dangling from his finger. This was not the look of someone struggling financially. "Niche car," I said instead of a greeting. "New got it a few months ago." Jason replied with a hint of pride. "Custom modifications just finished last week. Must have cost a fortune." I observed. An uncomfortable glance passed between Jason and Mom. In that moment, I knew they both knew exactly what had happened to my money. "Let's eat dinner." Mom interjected brightly. "I made your favorite lasagna." "Brandon." As we moved to the dining room, I noticed more signs of affluence. A new large-screen TV in the adjacent family room, and through Jason's open backpack, I glimpsed what looked like high-end gaming equipment. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture I didn't want to see but could no longer ignore. Maître 500 monthly hadn't disappeared into thin air. It had been funding a comfortable lifestyle for my mother and brother while I worked myself to the point of collapse. Dinner was excruciating. Mom prattled on about neighborhood gossip while serving lasagna on what appeared to be new dinnerware. Jason alternated between texting under the table and boasting about his job at the electronics store where he'd recently been promoted to assistant manager. "The employee discount is awesome," he explained, helping himself to seconds. "Got my whole gaming setup for practically wholesale." I pushed food around my plate, appetite gone. The $3.500 monthly that could have changed my life had apparently been funding Jason's hobbies and Mom's home improvements. "So, Brandon, Mom said you never mentioned why you suddenly decided to visit." Is everything okay with your job? The opening was perfect. I set down my fork and looked directly at her. Actually, I came to ask about the $3.500 Dad has been sending for me every month for the past 3 years. The clatter of Jason's fork against his plate was the only sound in the sudden silence. Mom's smile froze, then slowly faded. I don't know what you're talking about, she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. I pulled the bank statements from my jacket pocket and laid them on the table. These say otherwise. 3 years of monthly payments from Dad, specifically designated for me. Mom glanced at the papers but didn't touch them. Jason, however, leaned forward to look, then quickly sat back, his expression closing off. Your father and I had an arrangement after the divorce, Mom said carefully. He sends money to help with family expenses, but I haven't been living at home for years. I countered, and these payments started after I graduated college and moved to Seattle. Brandon, you don't understand how expensive it is to maintain a household. You're right. I don't. Because I've been living in a studio apartment, I can barely afford working myself to exhaustion, skipping meals to make rent while apparently my support money was being spent here. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mom's eyes darted to him briefly before returning to me. It wasn't like that. She insisted. The money went into the family account for emergencies. And emergencies like Jason's new car or that gaming rig I saw in his backpack. Jason's face flushed. Don't drag me into this. It's not my fault you chose some low-paying startup instead of a real job. His words hit like a physical blow, not because they were true, but because they revealed how little he understood about my life. Jason, I collapsed at work this week from exhaustion and dehydration. I've been skipping doctor appointments because I can't afford them. Meanwhile, you're driving around in a car that probably cost more than I make in a year. That's enough. Mom interjected. Brandon, you're being dramatic. You've always been independent and capable. Jason needed more support. Support with what his gaming habit. Mom's expression hardened. Not everyone is as naturally gifted as you. Brandon. Jason struggles. He needed the boost to his confidence that these things provided. I stared at her, incredulous. So? You took money specifically meant for me and gave it to Jason. Because what he wanted, expensive toys. And I was doing fine, drowning in student debt and working 6 0-hour weeks. Don't talk to Mom like that. Jason snapped. It's not her fault you moved across the country and barely keep in touch. I barely keep in touch because I'm working constantly to survive. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Do you have any idea what these past 3 years have been like for me? The root canal I put on a credit card I'm still paying off? The time I had bronchitis but couldn't afford to miss work, so I just powered through it for weeks. Mom had the decency to look uncomfortable, but her defensiveness remained. Brandon, we didn't know things were that difficult for you. You never said anything. Would it have made a difference if I had? Would you have actually sent me the money Dad intended for me? Her hesitation was answer enough. How much was it? I asked. Turning to Jason, how much of my money went into that car, that gaming equipment? Jason glanced at Mom before answering. I didn't know it was specifically for you. Okay, Mom said. Dad was sending family support money? That's not what I asked. Another uncomfortable silence fell. Finally, Jason muttered. The car was 32. Ling ling ling. The gaming setup about 7. Ling ling ling. The numbers hit me like physical blows. Almost $40. 000 of my money, gone on luxury items while I could barely afford groceries. And the rest? I asked. Turning back to Mom, where did the other $80? 000 go. She fidgeted with her napkin. The kitchen renovation, some to the mortgage, Jason's tuition at community college, the family vacation last year. Family vacation? You mean the trip to Hawaii you and Jason took while I was working through Christmas because I couldn't afford to fly home? Mom at least had the grace to look ashamed. We invited you. Brandon. No. You mentioned you were going and said, "It's too bad you can't join us." When I explained I couldn't afford the flight, you knew exactly why I couldn't come, and you never once offered to help with the ticket. The full weight of the betrayal was crushing me. 3 years of unnecessary hardship, 3 years of physical and mental health deterioration, 3 years of isolation and stress. While my mother and brother enjoyed the fruits of money meant for me, I trusted you. I said, my voice breaking slightly. All those times I called struggling to make ends meet, and you lectured me about financial responsibility. You knew Dad was sending money from me, and you deliberately kept it from me. It wasn't deliberate. Mom protested weakly. It just happened. At first, I was going to forward some to you, but then Jason needed new tires for his car, and then there was the roof leak, and it just continued. For 3 years, the incredulity in my voice was unmistakable. That's not an accident. Mom? That's a choice. A series of choices every single month. Jason, perhaps sensing his position was indefensible, tried a different approach. Look, we didn't know you were having such a hard time. You always acted like everything was fine, because that's what you do in this family. I exploded. You pretend everything's fine. Mom's been doing it since the divorce, and I learned from the best. Mom flinched as if I'd slapped her. That's not fair. Fair. You want to talk about fair? I gestured to the bank statements on the table. 126美元. Ling ling ling. Mom. That's what Dad sent for me. Money that could have changed everything about these last 3 years of my life. And you took it. I didn't think of it that way, she said softly. In my mind, it was supporting the family. I wasn't part of this household anymore. You knew I was struggling in Seattle. You knew I was working myself to exhaustion, and you let me believe I was on my own while spending my support money on kitchen renovations and vacations. Jason stood abruptly. This is you always think you're better than us with your fancy degree and big city job. So, things were tough for a while. Welcome to real life. The casual dismissal of my hardship was the final straw. I stood as well, shaking with anger and hurt. Real life. I've been living real life. Jason, you've been living on my dime. Apparently, enjoying luxuries I couldn't even dream of, because I was too busy working multiple shifts to keep a roof over my head. That's enough. Both of you. Mom interrupted. Brandon, I understand you're upset, but upset doesn't begin to cover it. I cut her off. You betrayed me. Mom, both of you did, and I don't know if I can forgive that. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but for once I didn't feel the familiar urge to comfort her. To smooth things over and pretend everything was fine, I'm staying at a hotel tonight, I said, gathering the bank statements. I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk again. As I moved toward the door, Mom called after me. Brandon, please, we can work this out. I paused, hand on the doorknob. Not turning back. The worst part isn't even the money. Mom, it's that you watched me struggle for 3 years and said nothing. You chose Jason over me again and again. With those words, I walked out, letting the door close behind me with a decisive click. In my rental car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, the tears I'd been holding back finally broke free. 3 years of hidden struggle, of pretending I was fine, of pushing my body and mind to breaking points, all unnecessary, all preventable, all because the people who should have protected me had instead taken advantage. As I drove away from my childhood home, I wasn't just leaving the physical space. I was leaving behind illusions about my family that had persisted despite evidence to the contrary. The revelation was painful, but there was also a strange sense of clarity cutting through the betrayal. For the first time, I saw the dynamic clearly, not as I wished it to be, but as it actually was. The hotel room was generic and impersonal. Beige walls, floral artwork, a queen bed with too many pillows. But tonight, its anonymity was comforting. I sat on the edge of the bed, emotionally drained from the confrontation, and called Dad. He answered immediately. "Brandon, how did it go?" "About as well as you'd expect," I replied, my voice hoarse. "They spent it, all of it." Dad was silent for a moment before asking, on what I recounted the details: Jason's car and gaming setup, Mom's kitchen renovation, their vacations and home improvements. With each item, Dad's breathing grew more controlled, the way it always did when he was restraining anger. "I'm coming there," he said finally. "I'll be on the first flight tomorrow." "You don't need to." "Yes, I do. This isn't just about the money, Brandon. This is about them watching you struggle while they lived comfortably on funds meant for you. I won't let that stand." The firmness in his voice was reassuring. For so long, I'd been handling everything alone. Having someone unequivocally on my side felt like finding solid ground after treading water for years. "Thank you," I said simply. "Get some rest. Text me your hotel information. I'll let you know when my flight lands." After hanging up, I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The events of the past few days replayed in my mind. The collapse at work, the hospital stay, Dad's revelation, tonight's confrontation. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unravel. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by dreams where I was running towards something important that remained just out of reach. I woke at dawn, feeling unrested but oddly clear-headed. After a quick shower, I checked my phone to find several missed calls and texts from Mom and one from Jason. I ignored them all, focusing instead on Dad's message confirming his flight would land at 1130. The airport reunion with Dad was emotional in ways I hadn't anticipated. Seeing him walk through the arrival gate, silver-haired now but still standing tall and straight, brought a rush of feeling I wasn't prepared for. When he pulled me into a tight hug, I felt like a child again, safe in a way I hadn't in years. "You look tired." "Som," he said, studying my face as we separated. "It's been a long week," I replied with a weak smile. We drove to a nearby restaurant, settling into a quiet booth where Dad ordered coffee for both of us before addressing the situation. "I've been thinking about this all night," he began. "And first, I need to apologize. I should have verified you were receiving the money. I should have asked directly instead of assuming everything was fine when you never mentioned it. It's not your fault," I assured him. "You had no reason to think Mom would do this." Des sighed heavily. "That's just it. Maybe I should have. The signs were there during our marriage. The way she favored Jason, the little financial discrepancies that never quite added up. It was strange hearing Dad acknowledge something I'd felt but never fully articulated. Mom's preferential treatment of Jason. Growing up, I'd always told myself I was imagining it, or that Jason simply needed more attention. "Why do you think she did it?" I asked. Dad considered the question, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Your mother has always seen herself as the protector of the family. After the divorce, I think she resented that I moved away, even though it was for a job that allowed me to provide better support. In him, Jason became the one who needed protecting, and you." He hesitated. "I was the one who left. Like you. I finished for him." He nodded. "Going to college. Moving across the country. Those were healthy, normal steps for a young adult. But I think in your mother's mind, they represented rejection. So, she punished me by taking my support money and giving it to Jason. I don't think she saw it as punishment, more like redirection of resources to where she thought they were needed more. Jason stayed close, so he was rewarded with comfort. You struck out on your own, so you were left to manage independently." The explanation made a certain twisted sense, though it didn't diminish the betrayal. "What happens now?" I asked. "First, we consult with a lawyer. What your mother did may constitute fraud. She received money under false pretenses Then we address your immediate needs. You mentioned medical bills, student loans. The practical approach was comforting. After years of struggling alone, having someone help plan a path forward felt like a weight lifting. After lunch, we met with a lawyer Dad had contacted before flying out. The consultation was sobering. While we had a solid case, the lawyer warned that pursuing legal action against family members often resulted in permanent rifts. Additionally, recovering the full amount could be difficult if the money had already been spent. You have options. The lawyer explained. We could file a civil suit or potentially pursue criminal charges for fraud, but I'd recommend starting with a formal demand letter outlining repayment terms. Dad and I exchanged glances, wordlessly agreeing to start with the less aggressive approach. Back at the hotel, we discussed longer-term plans. Dad had cleared his schedule for the entire weekend, dedicating the time to helping me sort through this mess. I've been thinking, he said. There's a tech hub developing in Phoenix, not far from where I live. Several companies are expanding and hiring. The cost of living is lower than Seattle, and you'd have my support nearby. The suggestion caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on surviving in Seattle, I hadn't considered other options. I'd need to think about that. I replied cautiously. My current job worked you to the point of collapse. Dad interjected. Brandon, I respect your independence. But there's a difference between being independent and being isolated. You don't have to do everything alone. His words resonated more deeply than I expected. For 3 years, I'd prided myself on making it work in Seattle, never asking for help, pushing through regardless of the cost. But where had that gotten me? A hospital stay, mounting debt, and the realization that I'd been struggling unnecessarily while my support money funded my brother's luxuries. I'll consider it, I conceded. But first, we need to deal with Mom and Jason. Dad nodded grimly. Tomorrow, tonight, you rest. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Perhaps because for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of survival entirely alone. Dad's presence in the adjoining room was a tangible reminder that I had support, real support, not the conditional kind my mother had shown. In the morning, Dad and I prepared for the confrontation. We agreed on a strategy: focus on the facts, stay calm, and present clear expectations for resolution. Dad would take the lead on financial discussions while I would address the emotional aspects of the betrayal. As we drove back to Mom's house, Dad placed his hand briefly on my shoulder. Remember, regardless of how this goes, you're not alone anymore. Those simple words carried me through the door, ready to face the family members who had betrayed my trust. But finally equipped with the support and clarity to demand accountability, Mom opened the door before we could knock, her expression shifting from hopeful to wary when she saw Dad standing beside me. Jason was already there, slouched in an armchair in the living room, pointedly focused on his phone. Richard, Mom said stiffly, I didn't expect to see you. Hello, Margaret, Dad replied, his tone professionally cordial. Given the circumstances, I felt my presence was necessary. We moved to the living room, an uncomfortable silence settling over us. I sat beside Dad on the sofa, facing Mom and Jason. The family dynamics were physically mapped in our positioning. The clear division between us couldn't have been more obvious. I assume Brandon told you his accusations. Mom began, a defensive edge to her voice. They're not accusations, Margaret. They're facts, supported by bank records. Dad's voice remained even, but I could sense the controlled anger beneath his calm exterior. For 3 years, I sent $3, $500 monthly, specifically designated for Brandon's support, money he never received. Jason finally looked up from his phone, his expression a mixture of defiance and discomfort. We didn't know it was specifically for Brandon. That's not true, Jason. I interjected. The transfer descriptions literally said, Brandon support every month. Dad and I have the bank statements. Mom shifted uneasily. The money went into the family account for general expenses. General expenses like Jason's $32? 000 car, Dad asked. Or his $7. 000 gaming equipment. The specific numbers hung in the air. Mom's face flushed as she realized we knew exactly how the money had been spent. Let's be clear about what happened here. Dad continued. Over the past 3 years, I sent $126. 000 intended for Brandon's living expenses, student loans, and savings. Instead, that money was used for home renovations, luxury items, and vacations that Brandon wasn't even invited to join. While I was working 6 zero-hour weeks, I added, skipping meals, postponing medical care, and barely making rent in a studio apartment with questionable plumbing. Mom's eyes darted between us. Perhaps finally understanding the gravity of the situation, we didn't realize things were that difficult for you. Brandon, you didn't ask. I replied simply, and when I did mention struggles, you lectured me about financial responsibility. Dad placed a folder on the coffee table. We've consulted with a lawyer. What happened here potentially constitutes fraud. Receiving money under false pretenses. However, we'd prefer to resolve this without legal action. The word lawyer visibly alarmed Mom. Jason sat up straighter, his previous nonchalance evaporating. What do you want? Jason asked bluntly. Repayment. Dad stated, the full $126. Ling, ling, ling. Mon pallet. That's impossible. We don't have that kind of money. Actually, a significant portion of it is sitting in your driveway and throughout this house. I pointed out, Jason's car, the kitchen renovation, the gaming equipment. You expect me to sell my car? Jason's voice rose incredulously. I expect you to take responsibility for the fact that your car was purchased with money stolen from me. I replied, surprising myself with my steadiness. Money that could have prevented me from working myself to the point of hospitalization. Mom began to cry quietly. Under different circumstances, her tears might have swayed me. But the memory of 3 years of unnecessary struggle hardened my resolve. We're prepared to be reasonable about the repayment terms, Dad said, his tone softening slightly. But there will be repayment. We've drafted a formal agreement. He pulled papers from the folder, sliding them across the table. The document outlined a repayment plan spanning 3 years, a timeline that matched the duration of the deception. The car needs to be sold immediately, Dad continued. Along with the high-end gaming equipment and any other luxury items purchased during this period, the proceeds will form the first installment of repayment. Jason looked ready to protest. But Mom placed a restraining hand on his arm. We'll need time to review this with our own lawyer, she said, attempting to regain some control of the situation. Of course, Dad agreed. You have 48 hours. After that, we proceed with legal action. The ultimatum hung in the air. Mom stared at the papers, seemingly unable to fully process what was happening. I trusted you, I said, breaking the silence. All those times I called, all those times I visited, and never complained about how hard things were. You watched me struggle while spending money meant for me. I don't know how to get past that. Mom finally met my eyes, her own swimming with tears. I never meant to hurt you, Brandon. It just happened gradually. Jason needed help with his car. Then there were house repairs. And it just continued. For 3 years, I emphasized, that's not an accident. Mom, that's a pattern of decisions. What about our relationship? She asked softly. Can we fix that? The question caught me off guard. In my focus on the financial betrayal, I hadn't fully processed the emotional aftermath. Could I forgive her? Should I? I don't know. I answered honestly. Right now, I need space and time, and I need to see actions, not just apologies. Jason had remained uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. I'll sell the car, he said unexpectedly, and the gaming stuff. His sudden capitulation surprised everyone, including himself. Judging by his expression, I didn't know the money was specifically for you, he continued, addressing me directly for the first time. But I should have questioned where it was coming from. No assistant manager job explains the kind of spending Mom allowed. It wasn't a full apology, but it was more self-awareness than I'd expected from my brother. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of the person he might become if forced to face consequences. The meeting concluded with Mom signing the preliminary agreement, acknowledging the debt, and committing to the first steps of repayment. As Dad and I prepared to leave, Mom quietly asked whether I would come back for Christmas. After everything that had happened, I couldn't give her the comforting answer she wanted. That depends on what happens between now and then, I told her. Outside, Dad admitted the confrontation had gone better than he expected, though neither of us fully trusted that Mom would follow through without pressure. Still, the legal agreement gave us something concrete to hold on to. That night, I made another decision that had been building inside me since the hospital. I would return to Seattle, give notice at my job, and start looking for work in Phoenix. I needed more than repayment. I needed a completely different life. Dad offered me his guest room for as long as I needed it. And for the first time in years, accepting help didn't feel like failure. 2 days later, I flew back to Seattle. Mom and Jason had already made the first installment on the repayment plan. Jason listed his car for sale and surrendered the gaming equipment to a consignment store. I still didn't know whether our family relationships could ever become what they had once pretended to be. But at least the lies were over. Back in Seattle, I resigned from the startup, packed the few belongings I had accumulated, and finally scheduled the medical appointments I had been postponing for years. Dad helped me rent a small moving truck, and as we pulled away from the apartment where I had spent 3 years barely surviving, I felt no sadness. I felt relief. 6 months later, my life looks almost unrecognizable. I now live in Phoenix in a comfortable one-bedroom apartment that costs half as much as my Seattle studio. I found a position at a more established tech company with better pay, reasonable hours, and actual benefits. I no longer work until my body collapses. I eat properly, sleep more, and use the mental health services included with my job. Dad lives only 20 minutes away, and our weekly dinners have become one of the best parts of my life. We are finally building the adult relationship we never had the chance to develop when he lived across the country. Mom and Jason have continued making the repayment payments as agreed. Jason's car sold quickly, and the money from the car and gaming equipment became a substantial first payment. Each monthly deposit feels like more than money. It is proof that what happened to me was finally acknowledged instead of minimized. My student loans no longer feel impossible. I have an emergency fund. And for the first time, I have even started investing a small amount each month. The constant fear that used to follow me everywhere has slowly faded. My relationship with Mom remains complicated. We speak occasionally, but our conversations are careful and guarded. She has started admitting that her choices hurt me, though she still sometimes tries to explain them away. During one conversation, she told me that the situation had started small and eventually became a pattern she didn't know how to stop. I am learning that I don't need a perfect apology in order to move forward. I can recognize progress without pretending the betrayal never happened. My therapist reminds me that forgiveness is a process, not a single decision. Jason has changed too. After losing the car and moving into a more modest apartment, he has started taking responsibility for his own life. He talks about returning to college and finishing his degree without depending on Mom to finance everything. In one recent message, he admitted that earning things for himself was actually not terrible. It was a small statement, but coming from him, it meant something. Dad and I have also spent time looking back at the family patterns that existed long before the missing money. He still feels guilty that he didn't notice sooner. But I remind him that the responsibility for taking the money belongs to the people who made those choices. What matters to me now is that he is here, through therapy and distance. I have also started understanding how my childhood shaped the way I lived as an adult. I learned to minimize my needs. I learned to believe that asking for help meant weakness. I learned to survive quietly so no one could accuse me of being a burden. Those habits nearly destroyed my health. Now I am learning something different. Independence doesn't mean isolation. Strength doesn't mean suffering in silence. Boundaries aren't punishment. They are protection. Requiring accountability from Mom and Jason wasn't revenge. It was the only way any future relationship with them could possibly be honest. I still don't know whether I will ever completely forgive Mom for watching me struggle while spending money meant for me. Some days I feel closer to forgiveness than others. But I now understand that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting what happened, removing consequences, or allowing someone unrestricted access to my life again. I can let go of bitterness while still protecting myself. The betrayal will always be part of my story. But it doesn't control my future anymore. For the first time in years, I'm not simply surviving. I'm building a life I actually want. I have work I enjoy, relationships built on mutual respect, financial stability, better health, and peace that once seemed impossible. The biggest lesson wasn't really about $126. Ling ling ling. It was about what money revealed. It showed me who was willing to sacrifice for me, who was willing to take from me, who valued honesty, and who expected me to keep accepting less because I had always been the capable one. I used to believe family meant staying connected no matter what. Now I understand that real family is built on trust, respect, support, and accountability. Sometimes the people related to us by blood provide those things, and sometimes they don't. As I sit on the balcony of my Phoenix apartment watching the desert sunset, I finally feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. Not because every relationship has been repaired, not because every dollar has been returned, and not because the past has disappeared, but because I finally see my family clearly, understand my own worth, and know that I no longer have to destroy myself just to prove that I can survive.